Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the workshop this afternoon, which is an introduction to neurodiversity. Our session today is part of our Imagine If conference series, and this year's we're exploring the theme, Imagine if today and every day, each child and young person had access to arts and culture. My name's Susie. I'm an area manager at Culture Bridge North East. We're part of Arts Council England's national network of bridge organisations connecting education and cultural sectors to enable better access to quality arts and cultural education for all children and young people, no matter what their circumstances. And every year this seems to be a bit becoming more and more important. I've got a couple of bits of housekeeping just before we start. I'd like to remind everyone that of the delegate guidelines which have been sent out in your joining packs, but I'll go over a couple of those details now. We'd like you to remain muted unless speaking and keep your settings on speaker view so that you can see whoever's presenting in the full screen rather than everybody else in the room. Please make sure that you've got your name and or your organisation written clearly in your Zoom participant name so that we can take the attendance. And if you feel comfortable to do so, please add your pronouns as well. If you've got a question during the session, please do put them in the chat box. I'll gather those up. We'll hopefully try and answer them at various points throughout today's session. And if we don't get round to all of them, then we'll work out a way of trying to get answers to those questions and get back to you at a future time. We have with us today our digital stage manager, Abby, who from AMA, who is here to deal with any technical explosions that we encounter. I'm hoping that we don't come up against anything like that, but if you at any point have any technical digital troubles, then please send Abby a message in the chat and hopefully we'll be able to sort that out as well. We gathered consent in your booking forms, but this is just another reminder that this session is being recorded and used as an Imagine If digital resource. Please feel free to share the workshop experience on social media by including our Twitter handle @CultureBridgeNE and using this year's conference hashtag ImagineIf2022. I'm going to put them in the chat so you don't need to write them down. And now it's time to introduce today's speakers. We have Dr. Justine Riley from the Neurodiverse Museum. And what I'll do is I'll hand straight over to Justine now. Thanks very much, Justine.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And hello. I'm going to test out the text to start off with by sharing my screen and crossing everything, but it works. Can you all see that? So there's only a few of you that I can see. Brilliant. So if everybody nods, then I can see what's happening. So I'm really, really pleased to be here today, and it's lovely to see everybody. We've got an hour-and-a-half session. There will be some breakout sessions as we go through. We'll try and make sure that the groups are fairly small so that there's lots of opportunity to talk and the groups won't change so that you're not having to constantly find your way around new and different people. So let's get going. So I'm Dr. Justine Riley. I'm the director of the Neurodiverse Museum. We developed the organisation when we discovered that lots of neurodivergent people were not being properly represented within the museum sector, and that was all different people, from children to older people, and across everything from the workforce to what we were providing. And so we set up the Neurodiverse Museum. I'm neurodivergent myself, I'm autistic, so you'll probably notice at times I don't look at the screen and I'm totally overwhelmed by the amount of people that are in the viewing box, so there's only a few of you that I can see at a time. So to start off with, I want to kind of get an understanding about where everybody is at the moment in terms of what neurodiversity is. So we'll put you into breakout rooms. I think there'll be about 4 or 5 in each room. 5 minutes just to discuss what is neurodiversity, where are you coming from at the moment in terms of your understanding of that in the rooms, and then we'll have a quick feedback session afterwards. When you go into the breakout room, if you've not done this before, I imagine most of you will have done, but just in case you haven't, it will ask you on your screen, do you want to go into the breakout room? You just click yes and it will magically send you off there. And at any stage you can come back into this main room here. So one question, what is neurodiversity? 5 minutes. See you on the other side. Okay, hello everyone. I think you're all back. Is that right, Albie? Is everyone back? Yeah, okay. I hope that was okay. Hope everyone managed to find their way around that all right. So we were talking about what is neurodiversity, what's it mean to you? So we'll have 5 minutes of feedback. I can't see you all, but if you would like to feedback either for your room or individual comments, if you could raise your hand either physically or the remote button way, then we will call on you just to share your thoughts. So I can't see you all, so go for it. Go on, someone feedback. I know you've been talking in there loads and loads and loads. Anyone? I might call on someone. I definitely won't do that.
I think 2 people put their hand up, Maria and Grace. You can see them on the icon.
Yeah, I can't see everybody, but Susie, are you okay? So I can now see Grace. Yes, you've come to the top. Grace, feel free to unmute.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so we in our group we did a little bit of a kind of brainstorm of different neurodivergent I was going to say conditions, diagnoses, and then we talked about how a lot of people have been underdiagnosed with these conditions because of kind of misinformation or a lack of education around them. And then we were sort of getting on to talking a little bit about access support within our different organisations and things for these things. But yeah, it felt like the 5 minutes went very quick.
It also feels like you might have like discussed the entire training thing. No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Cool.
Maria?
Yeah, I just it's just a way the brain is wired differently from other people. So I mean, I was just mentioning very intelligent people, like Einstein, Elon Musk, and other people who really excel. They all on the category of neurodivergent. Not that it means disabled, but it means a different way of using the brain. And so it's actually people that make neurodivergent feeling disabled, because the word has been made for people who are neurotypical. I just was giving the example. I'm left-handed, so I've always had the troubles using certain items like the kettle, the mugs, the iron, because the word has been made for right-handed people. So the same with neurodiversity.
Oh, good example. Thanks, Maria. Would anyone else like to comment or add to the discussion? Feel free to raise your hand now. I'm looking through. Okay, I'm going to start on the next session. So I think you're probably all coming at the session from slightly different understanding of what neurodiversity is. So some of you will go, oh, okay, I kind of already know some of this, and for others of you it might be totally new. And when we get to the questions, feel free to ask additional things there if there's more information that you'd like to know about. When we deliver these sessions, we tend to start with the terminology. We've done a lot of training around the sector, and one of the things that people say that they struggle with the most is understanding how to talk about neurodivergence and feel comfortable in that. We found that a lot of people actually didn't deliver work provision, whatever that might be, for neurodivergent individuals or children, because they didn't feel comfortable to know where to start and they were worried about getting it wrong. So we start by trying to break that down, saying, actually, if you've got that knowledge and that understanding, it's okay. So there's some of the things that we'll look at in today's session are neurodiverse and neurodivergent, the difference between them and why they're not necessarily interchangeable, clinical deficit language and the issues around that, identity first language, we'll look at the social model of disability, and then reasonable adjustments. We have a session later this week that goes into quite a lot of detail about how to provide that equitable experience and what reasonable adjustments might look like. This session is very much more that introduction to what is neurodiversity, and how does that apply to us within the cultural sector. But I will try, because I've noticed there's different people in the two sessions, I will try to touch on some of those things around reasonable adjustments in here as well. So beginning with the terminology, and where does neurodiversity come from? And why will you still find it difficult to get some people to understand that it even exists and wanting to discuss it in this way? So Judy Springer came up with this term, and this perception in the 90s, talking about the fact that brains are different, that not all brains are the same. And as you touched on in your breakout rooms, we all have different brains. There are lots of different diversity within the human condition. The neurodiversity paradigm, looking at that philosophy of the fact that brains are different. So just understanding that not all brains are the same. The neurodiversity movement is trying to shift that and change that, and is trying to say that actually we need to be looking at neurodivergent people in a different way. We need to be recognising them, acknowledging them, and not always thinking about the issues and the problems that we see that neurodivergent people have. But we need to be changing that. When we talk about the way that our brains work, a lot of times you'll see in literature people talking about neurodivergent people as neurodiverse people. And so one of the things we try and say is, a person can't be neurodiverse, a person is neurodivergent. And we'll look at some of those particular types of ways that people are neurodivergent later. But this is where someone's brain is considered what's different from the normal, or actually what we're starting to say is from the neuromajority, from what the majority of people's brains are. Neurotypical, where someone's brain is considered to be the normal, the majority. Most people's brain works in that way. And society, as you pointed out, Maria, has largely developed to support people whose brains work in that way. So neurodiverse is a community or a population that's got lots of different types of brains. Some of them might be neurotypical, some of them neurodivergent. If all the brains in that community are neurotypical, it's not neurodiverse. I'm hoping that's making sense. We try every time to make this as straightforward as we can in terms of understanding that terminology, but I find this slide tends to help outline that a little bit. So in terms of what is neurodivergence, all of these different terms here, and as you touched on, they're diagnosed conditions that people are given by a psychologist or a clinical psychologist to say, this is what is happening with your brain. Now, in the past, that's been looked at as a very clinical deficit approach. There's something wrong with someone's brain. We have to go and get them diagnosed so we can understand what we do with them. The neurodiversity movement is trying to shift that and trying to change that, and saying, we need to understand how our brains work, but there's nothing wrong with our brains. Our brains are just different. So these are some of the conditions: autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. I find it ironic that those words are incredibly difficult to say. Tourette's, there's lots and lots of different types of neurodivergence. And we've done this training a few times where people have thought that neurodivergence and autism are interchangeable, and it's generally autism that is focused on. And what we try and say is, actually, there's a massive amount of different types of neurodivergence, and it's really important for the cultural sector to understand that and to support that. As a dyslexic person, museum, it can be really disorientating and really difficult to understand what is happening. And we've done quite a lot of work with different people who've got different neurodivergence, and the sector, even if it's starting to think about autism, is not always thinking about all the other neurodivergence. So then we talk about the social model of disability. And again, you touched on this. Traditionally, and this still happens massively within our education sector and is also happening within the cultural sector to an extent, we focus on the person as the issue. The person has got this diagnosis, or this is happening to them, and therefore they're the person that's got something wrong or needs something changing. It's really unhelpful because it centres that issue on the person who actually doesn't have anything wrong with them as and isn't of themselves. As you were saying, it's society that is making things very difficult for them and causing disability. Some neurodivergent people will class themselves as disabled and some people will not. Something that's really, really, you really need to understand that you cannot make an assumption that somebody will consider themselves to be disabled if they're neurodivergent and also won't. So the social model of disability looks at everything differently. It focuses on the barriers. What is it that we're doing as a society, as an organisation? What do we put into place that means that it's incredibly difficult for neurodivergent people to access what we do? And that could be in terms of our workforce, it could be in terms of our provision for children and young people, it could be in terms of our displays and our exhibitions. What is it that we're doing that makes it incredibly difficult for people to access what we do? And once we start shifting that and looking at it in a different way and thinking about the issue is with us and we need to start to take that responsibility and change, it starts to open up the opportunities that are there for neurodivergent people. So when we talk about describing a neurodivergent individual, you'll often hear the terms here on the left, so the person first language, someone suffers from autism, is on the spectrum, person with autism, talking very much about something that can be picked up and put down, that isn't necessarily central to who that person is. You'll still find within the autistic community and the neurodivergent community that there are still tensions around person first and identity first language, particularly I think between the neurodivergent people themselves and people who are talking on behalf of neurodivergent people, so sometimes the parental community. Identity first language is definitely something, there's been a lot of studies that largely neurodivergent people would prefer to be used. So I would prefer someone to say that I'm an autistic person. It isn't something that I can pick up and put down. It is part of who I am. It is the way that I function. It's crucial that that is the way that it's looked at. And the reason why this is important is because it shifts the paradigm of how you view a neurodivergent person, but it's also different in the way that you talk to people, the way that you write about maybe provision that you might have. It's really important to understand why there might be a need to use that specific type of language, but also why there might be tensions about that as well within the community that you're trying to reach out to. So before I go any further, does anyone have any questions about the terminology, about how we use the terminology, or any comments that they'd like to add at this stage from their own experience? And am I talking too fast? Because I do talk very fast. Any hands? If you use the electronic hand, you go to the top of my screen and I can see you really quickly. No?
Oh yeah. Okay, yes, the other very nuisance is they call it disorder. Why is it disorder?
Sorry, say that again, Maria. Was it Maria?
The other thing is that when they define neurodiversity disorder, it's totally wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's coming from that clinical deficit approach. There's an issue, there's something that's wrong, and it's because our neurodivergent brains work differently. They're not wrong, they're different, but because that's perceived as we can't do this or we suffer from that, there's a disorder, there's something wrong with it. And the neurodivergent movement is trying to change that. It's trying to say, actually, that's not acceptable to talk about in this way. You'll see in a lot of EHCPs, educational healthcare plans for children and young people, the terminology that is used throughout those is X suffers from, X needs to do X. It's very much about the child being the issue, what's wrong with the child and what the child needs to do to change. And to have that terminology shifted by schools and local authority takes a considerable amount of advocacy and time to make that happen, because you're looking at a mindset of somebody saying, actually, it isn't about the child. It isn't about the child having to shift. It's about what are we doing to remove those barriers so that the child can access what is needed. So there's been a few education healthcare plans recently where I said, please don't use the word suffers. That's not acceptable anymore. It's not okay to say X suffers from. What is happening is you've got a neurotypical environment. That environment is making the child incredibly anxious. Shift the environment and the child will not be as anxious. That we are still a long way away from getting a lot of the organisations that work with children and young people on a day-to-day basis from understanding that, and it's causing significant trauma and harm. And I think we talk about that in the session on Thursday about why it's crucial, because it isn't just a situation of, oh, well, we've used that term or we've said that thing. Actually, the impact that is having on children and young people across our society is enormous. And when we look at mental health, and when we look at lots of different research that comes through around mental health for children and young people, and we sit there and we scratch our heads and say, well, why is this happening? All you have to do is look at what's going on for the neurodivergent population of children and young people. What is happening for them and what experience are they having? And you can quickly see a huge correlation between the fact that they are not experiencing what they should be in terms of an equitable education, access to cultural experience, access to all different types of experiences that neurotypical peers get, that you start to see, okay, we can see the correlation. If we could start to shift that and start to recognise the needs of the neurodivergent child and young person's population, we'd shift the mental health issues quite quickly. We're a long way away from that. And as you can probably tell, it makes me incredibly cross that we're such a long way away from that. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Maria.
This is I totally agree with what you say, because we're having a situation as such at the moment. The school is trying to fit the child. The school is not changing for the child, not making any accommodation for the child, as if the anxiety is just a problem of the child. It's really ridiculous. So it's very difficult. I don't know. How did you do school? I mean, did you go to school? Did you go to a private school? You became a doctor. I mean, I'm amazed.
So I have a feeling that, first of all, when I went to school, it wasn't the same as it is now. I think there's definitely been a shift. Secondly, I think what happens is children mask. Some children learn to mask quicker and better than others, which is not a good thing. It definitely was not a good thing for me. I was very good at making sure I was in the background and quiet, and no one ever asked me any questions, and I just got on and did what I had to do. But it was incredibly traumatic, and that trauma didn't really kick in until I got older. And I think what happens as well is the trauma isn't being seen often early enough. So at primary school level, it's not being seen. It's not being seen until it gets into secondary school, by which time it's almost too late. The provision isn't in place, the diagnosis isn't in place, and neither is the support. And then the child has got to a level of trauma that means that their unmet needs are being seen as behaviour issues. And so instead of us going, oh, hang on, we have a child here who seems to be able, intelligent, is generally, has lots of potential, but they are acting in this way. Let's say it's the child that's naughty, or there's a problem here. Or if we started to look at that differently and started to think, is this unmet need, and what unmet needs might there be, I think we would start to shift things. I think if you've got a child who is neurodivergent, doesn't show that in unmet needs in terms of meltdowns. If you have that in terms of a child who shows that in shutdowns, so they are quiet, situationally non-speaking, which you might have heard of as selectively mute, which is totally wrong. Again, clinical language. There's no choice in being situationally non-speaking at all. I was situationally non-speaking as a child, and believe it or not, still am now at times. It's an impossibility to be able to speak. If you have a child that's like that, they go under the radar often. Oh, we don't see any issues, there's no problems, everything's okay. But you are witnessing at home that is not the case. If you have a child that has meltdowns as they get older, that becomes increasingly difficult, because schools will see that as behavioural problems and kick in their behavioural policies, which just adds more trauma to the situation, and you end up with children's school refusing and all those different things that happen outside of education, ghost children, mental health issues. if we could pick this up a lot earlier on and remove the stereotypes of what it is to be neurodivergent, and started recognizing that if a child who can read at 5, potentially, let's have a think that that might be a hyperlexic child. Most hyperlexic children are autistic. Therefore, this child might look like they're achieving all these things for your SATs or whatever else, but let's think that that child might actually be autistic. It might be useful to know that now, to be able to support them as they go through, rather than let's ignore that, and when they get to 15 tell them that they've got a problem and it's them and it's all about them. It's not a helpful way to be, and I think society doesn't help that, because we have a very negative stereotypical view of neurodivergence still. And part of the work of the Neurodiverse Museum is to change that and say, you think the neurodivergence looks like this, but actually it looks like all of us. It looks like, you can't say what a neurodivergent person looks like or acts like, because we're everywhere and most of us are undiagnosed. So it's trying to kind of get that shift, I think, in society. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Well,
thank you.
I mean, it's difficult in this session. I suppose we're not really covering that too much, but it is something that, you know, I deal with on a day-to-day basis in terms of supporting the shift for children and young people and the recognition. And I guess within the cultural sector, often what might happen is lots of NEETs children who are in alternative provision might be a part of what lot of the potentially provision that comes out to the cultural sector. So we need to know about that, and we need to know what could be the background behind why these children are in alternative provision. Why are they not in education? Why are they not in school? Why is that happened? And that won't necessarily have been recognised. So we need to know, actually, maybe nobody else understands why that's happening, but there's a potential that these are neurodivergent children that we're working with. What do we do to support? Right, I need to keep an eye on the clock. So moving on, so why are cultural institutions then so difficult places for neurodivergent people, children, young people? It's all the things we've been talking about, really, and it doesn't shift dependent on whether that's an educational setting or cultural institution setting. Everything has been set up for the neurotypical, the neuromajorative environment. Everything has been set up around that. And as a result, if you're neurodivergent, there's a requirement on you to assimilate to some level. And that might be masking, or that might be having to participate in something in a way that is incredibly difficult. And those two things together cause anxiety and trauma, and it's really difficult. So if you're wanting to make your venue accessible to neurodivergent people, you have to ensure that you're removing those barriers, because the anxiety and the trauma caused by the experience has got to be less than the quality and the relevance of the experience. Because if it isn't, then the neurodivergent person cannot participate. It's not a choice. And education is exactly that. If the anxiety and the trauma caused by being in school is greater than the quality and the relevance of the experience that you get when you're in school, you're not going to school. Or even if you are, when you're there, you're not able to learn. Anxious people cannot learn. Our brains can't work in that way. We need to be calm and in a very safe environment to be able to take on board whatever education is coming to us. So this is kind of like the sort of crux of what we try and support people to understand. It's not a choice to be anxious and trauma and have trauma going through us. It's not something we want to do. It is the neurotypical environment that is causing that to happen to us. And unless those barriers are removed, we cannot make that change. We can't suddenly go, oh, do you know what? I'm not going to be anxious about this. I'm going to find this okay. It doesn't work like that. And some of the systems that you'll see employed within educational settings, for example, like growth mindset, are very discriminative against neurodivergent people. If you're telling an autistic person, for example, if you're telling me I don't have a growth mindset if I don't do X, whereas I should be able to push myself and do this and get out of the hole, and I should be able to do that. If the reason I can't push myself and do that is because I'm autistic and my brain works differently, you're essentially telling me that it's me that's the problem, but it isn't. And actually, neurodivergent people have incredibly elastic brains. We're very analytical. We're very able to think differently, just anyway. So to be put in that kind of perceptional view of, well, growth mindset works in this way, and if you can't deal with that, then you're the issue. It's a real problem, and we're telling children that at an early stage, which again does not help with self-esteem, and it doesn't help with our sense of self or ability to actually be able to tackle things that are tricky. So we've covered quite a lot, and in a moment we're going to look a little bit more about the backgrounds around why this is important. But again, I just want to kind of get a feel for everybody in the training space of what you think of why it's important to understand neurodiversity for your work, and then what kind of things we can do to support neurodivergent individuals in museums or whatever setting it is that you're working within in terms of the cultural sector. We have 10 minutes again for that. Hopefully everybody will be able to go straight back into the same rooms again. This time I'm going to ask you if you could say one person in your room to be the kind of spokes person to come back and maybe feedback, and we'll do that for maybe 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. So 10 minutes, breakout rooms, why it's important to understand neurodiversity for our work, and what kind of things should we be thinking about to support neurodivergent individuals. Is that okay to go into breakout rooms again, Abby? We'll again broadcast a minute before it's time to come back. Okay, hi everybody, how's that? Good, yeah. So just a couple of questions, just going to have a little bit of time to feedback. Now, did somebody allocate themselves in each room to feedback? And if so, could you raise your hand? Hey, Rachel, let's start with you.
Yeah, I was allocated because I was scribbling notes, but now I'm looking at my notes that they are very, very scribbly. I do apologise. But we had, with Marie and Emily having a really fantastic conversation, kind of talked a lot about the why, so kind of that as cultural institutions we are created for people and that we should be open and inclusive for everyone, and that is kind of a human right. That really kind of getting a really good knowledge across the organisation of that understanding of neurodiversity, so not second guessing what support people need. I think a lot of times people are lumped into groups, and kind of that thing of actually, although people might need all sorts of different support, and kind of really understanding and kind of talking to people about that, especially kind of thinking about jobs. So we were talking about kind of HR fully understanding when people kind of when there's neurodiverse applicants, of kind of how to make sure that kind of that application process is inclusive for them and understanding of them. And kind of we started then talking about kind of how we can start to support people in our organisations. So kind of thinking as well, that's kind of help. And then also kind of that question around interpretation, about kind of video and kind of zooming in, kind of different colours, kind of especially with dyslexia, people have like different colours and reading on different colours, but kind of understanding. I gave an example of being working on a project with scripts, and that there was a large number of dyslexic people in that group, and they all wanted different colours and different ways, and kind of making sure that everyone had what they needed. And then Emily was really generous of kind of sharing experience as a dyslexic person, kind of finding out about kind of when applying for university, about the support that was given and the report written about all of the masking. And Emily was really generous sharing that, which Maria found really fascinating, around masking, and kind of getting a report about that, and then starting to talk about our organisations of kind of quiet mornings, sensory bags. But yeah, it was a really fascinating conversation.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like you've had, a really good conversation there, and touched on things we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, I think there's, and we were talking about in the breakout as well, that kind of potential to sort of go, oh, we'll just do one big thing for all neurodivergent people. There we go, isn't that? I think we've done it. And actually, there's so many different needs and so many different things that different neurodivergent people need. Yes, we can make some assumptions about shifts and changes, but actually there's a massive difference between what an autistic person might need to what someone who's ADHD might need, and there's intersectionality and lots of, it's much more complicated than I think sometimes the cultural sector are used to looking at it, but we're definitely starting to go down that route. And you'll see I use yellow on the back of my slides because I'm constantly trying to make sure that there's some way of making it shift, but I'm conscious that yellow is really difficult for some people. So it's it's just trying to think about all those different ways that we could shift what we do. Thank you. Emma, you're next.
Hi everyone. We had Lisa and Dave in our group, and somebody else whose mic was off. Sorry, I forgot your name. But we had good conversations too around so the reasons why are things around like understanding the extent of the remit for like equality and diversity, so that you are kind of doing everything that you need to do, having that awareness, and ultimately just improving enjoyment for people. Like, it's not really fair if some people don't enjoy themselves when coming to cultural places, wherever they are, should be about enjoyment and learning and having a nice time. And it's like a place where people create sort of memories and positive experiences that they take forward into their adulthood. So it's really important that they are enjoyable as well. And that usually means that by improving or thinking about those shifts, by improving it for some people, you usually end up by improving it for everybody. So that was worthwhile. And David will probably join me in the second bit as well, because he works at the Centre for Life, where they've done a lot of stuff around this. But he says not only is it like the right thing to do, but it's really good business sense as well. And so in terms of the things that you can do, we, especially Lisa from a background in school as well, not only having staff awareness and training, but also support and the capacity to be able to support people when they're visiting or accessing it, because it takes more thinking, more thought, more resources potentially, which needs just considering as part of that. We talked about visual stories, sensory information, having sensory bags and other equipment and tools available that people can use. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, David.
Not really, Emma, other than something we didn't actually cover, which is a bit of, people often don't give neurodiverse communities a voice, and they're often the people that might be at the back of the class, not saying anything, keeping their head down, very much like you said yourself, just trying to keep under the radar. And therefore, when organisations come in the cultural sector, give the community a voice and they actually do something with that voice, it's much more powerful for the individual than people would give credit. And of course, it makes a massive difference to the organisation. And when 20% of the population say that they've got some kind of disability, what it means is that if you've got a family of 5 people, one of them's probably got some level of disability. So the more you can make your centre accessible, no matter not whether it's diversity, it's related to neurodiversity or deaf or sight loss or whatever, the more you make a difference, the more likely you are to attract visitors. It's obvious. It's just obvious. It's good business sense.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, there's so many reasons why we should be doing it. It's difficult to understand why we aren't doing it. And it sounds like you've had a really good conversation there as well about that kind of equitable experience. And we, in the Neurodiverse Museum, we don't tend to use the term so much around equality and inclusion. We talk about equity, because we're saying actually often what we've done is kind of use the term inclusion to kind of go, oh, well, we're including people, we're thinking about it. But that's not what we're after. We're after equity. We're after everyone having the same kind of experience. How do we make that happen? And once we start thinking about it in those terms, we are starting to talk to people and include voices in a different way. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Helen.
Hello everyone, I'm Helen Kumar. I've just started working 6 weeks ago at Liberdade at Gosford Civic Theatre. So Liberdade is an organisation which specifically works with people with learning disabilities and autism. And they've been going for 20 years creating performances and delivering workshops. And 6 years ago, they took over Gosford Civic Theatre. The reason behind that was that they wanted to, and the people within the company wanted to create an organisation not where people with learning disabilities and autism can go to, but a place for the community which is led by people with learning disabilities and autism. So we have autistic people on our board, working in our bar, in our cafe, and it's about raising other people's aspirations of what people with learning disabilities can achieve. It's about being visible. Prior to that, I know a lot of people on this call, my previous life, 6 weeks ago, as dance engagement coordinator at Dance City. So we talked in our group about practical things, because we have people on from 7 Stories as well, and Mortal Fools, about practical things that we can do to support. And Gosford Civic Theatre, because it's still quite new as an organisation and as a working theatre, these are still being developed. And it was practical things such as a page on your website with pictures of real people that work there. So we've just started, so that was one of my big things with Gosford. So our marketing person's lovely is people don't want photographs of themselves on there, but they've got no choice now. It's about recognizing who people are, so you know the expectation, you know who you're going to meet if you're coming to a meeting with somebody. At Dance City, we'd set up a virtual tour of the organisation as well, which for school groups especially, or people coming to public classes, actually, this is what to expect. 7 Stories were saying they've done something similar with images and pictures of literally, you will come in through this way. These are the people that you'll meet at the ticket office, at the reception. And so we talked a lot about practical things. With Mortal Fools as well, we were talking and the Forge about relaxed performances. I always find that term really strange anyway. I always imagine you sit there with a cup of tea and your slippers on. That seems relaxed, or a glass of wine. I'm totally up for that. But this idea of relaxed performances that specifically welcome people with neurodivergent, and forgive me because I always say the wrong words, so please forgive me, Justine. But shouldn't all our performances welcome everybody? Is that not what we're aiming for? Should we be doing relaxed performance as well? For kids, yeah, we'll turn up the lights a little bit. We won't go to full blackout. Well, my children are 3 and 6. If it goes to a blackout in a theatre when I've taken them to see shows, they don't like it. So why don't we just cut those sort of Victorian theatre ideas? We don't need it, unless it specifically demands it. Let's start changing things. So it's great to do relaxed performances and specific things here, but what we're working towards, it should be as organisations, is a performance or a workshop that we don't need to label it as, yes, we're being inclusive, because that should just happen. That's the goal. And I think for lots of organisations, it's finding those steps to that. So we did talk about those practical things, virtual tour, who people are on websites, making them real people, and what to expect when you're actually coming.
Oh, that sounds brilliant conversation in there. So one of the key things that led to the Neurodiverse Museum being set up was quiet hours. It absolutely blew my mind that we would be creating things that further excluded rather than thought about how we ensure the equitable experience is there for everybody all the time, and almost like a kind of, oh well, we'll do it slightly differently over here, and that'll be nice for these people. And it's like, we want to be sitting and chatting with the curators, we want to be knowing what's going on over here. We want the same equitable experience, thanks very much, just in a different, slightly different way that doesn't impact on other people but makes it accessible for us. So oh god, totally. And then in terms of the visual support, I mean, you can't underestimate how important that is. That being able to go on a website and even if it's just done on a camera, a phone, where you've gone around and said, this is what the venue's like. When you get here, this is what it looked like. This is who you might meet. This is where you go when you first get. All of those questions, if it's in written form, I will find that impossible to take in. I just had to have a medical procedure, and the medical profession is exactly the same. But I went onto the website and they'd actually done a video and a visual instruction, changed the entire thing, because I was able to go through the process and go, okay, get where I'm going. And the anxiety disappears, and the ability to take part in what it is so much better. And yes, I can mask it because I'm used to doing that, but it causes significant trauma. And I think that's what has happened to a lot of people. they've come through a process where they don't know why they find things different, and they've just got used to dealing with it. But as a result, we might not go to places that actually we want to go to, or that should be welcoming us because they're for the public, because we can't make that work, or we know we're going to have to mask or find it so anxious that it's just not worth it. Oh, that sounds amazing in that conversation as well. Wish I was in them all. Thank you. Rachel Barron.
Hi. We talked about a lot of similar things really to what everyone else has discussed. When we talked about what should we do, we were saying that really the first thing that a lot of places should do or need to do is to have discussions with people who would benefit from any changes that might be made, rather than just making changes and then assuming that they would be the right thing. So yeah, really kind of having consultations and asking people, inviting people to come in, or, asking those questions first of all. We did talk a lot about pre-visit stuff as well. Things like websites and any printed material, any leaflets, can they be in different formats, that kind of thing? Can they be more visual rather than just written information? And yeah, making it clear what to expect before you arrive, and that, comms teams have a role to kind of play in that, as well as people who are doing engagement work, kind of face-to-face engagement work. So yeah, at the SIL where I work, we have last year or the year before, we commissioned a video to be made where it does, go through from the car park right through to the main entrance, the reception, the toilets, the exhibition. It kind of shows you step by step like each thing. So yeah, having things like that to kind of show beforehand, because that can be quite a barrier to people if they don't know what it's like before they get there. And we talked about places like libraries and museums possibly having a role to play in kind of promoting understanding amongst the wider community. Maybe starting with your own staff, having training for staff, making sure everyone's on the same page, everyone kind of knows how to deal with certain situations, and kind of getting over that fear of maybe doing or saying the wrong thing. But then we talked a bit about, people in general have that fear of doing and saying the wrong thing, or maybe are not very tolerant towards certain situations as well that they might come across when in public places. So maybe we've got that role to play to kind of promote a bit more of that understanding and help, I don't know, improve that tolerance among people. And yeah, that's kind of most what we talk about, other than what other people have mentioned about, why it's important for us to understand, to make it accessible for everybody, basically.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think the last group touched on it as well in terms of that representation of neurodivergent people. And I absolutely agree. A primary focus, and we'll talk about in a moment, of the Neurodiverse Museum is representation. So if you go into museums, where are neurodivergent people in the collections and the displays and the exhibitions? Where are they? They don't exist. That's not right. We've got a massive responsibility and role to shift that, but it has to come from asking the neurodivergent population, what do you want? Where are you? And we probably have the collections, we're just not interpreting them in the right way. So think, yeah, definitely. And there's one more group. Rachel, is it Rachel? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Well, a lot of it's
probably covered
already. Yeah, but we just spoke more generally really about why we think it's important for people to feel valued, that they feel part of our community, that everybody's needs are met, and that we're removing barriers. But one of the most interesting things was what we do. One of the organisations in our group employs people who are representative of all different neurodivergent groups. So then you've got that kind of on the inside, so they can communicate the things that work and the things that don't work. And obviously they're honest, so you can make changes and be kind of living and breathing that all the time, rather than going out to members of the public and customers and service users. You've got that in your team. So having role models within the organisation and having good communication with everybody about that. Obviously, all the different tips and tricks that people have talked about already, but remembering that one resource doesn't fit everybody. And yeah, things like the who's who and virtual tour lots of visual things and words as well.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Just touching on the workforce for a second, that's something we were chatting as well about while you were in the breakout rooms. That kind of ability to shift how you employ people and making sure that the application process is equitable as well. Because if your organisation doesn't reflect the population you want to work with, it's really difficult to make sure that you're constantly delivering that relevant experience that's equitable for everybody. And that starts at the employment stage. How are you doing that? How are you making sure that that's okay? But then also we run a network of about 150 different, largely museums, but there are other organisations as well. And some of the research that's coming out of that is saying that often neurodivergent people do not feel comfortable to disclose that they're neurodivergent in the workforce because they fear they will be discriminated against. And that's still happening now. That people don't think they can say, and they're with justification that they can say that they're neurodivergent because they know they will have some kind of negative impact on them and their career if they do. It's totally unacceptable that should be happening. And it's part of the reason why I do the role that I do, is to kind of shift that perception. And there's quite a few people who are trying to start doing that now and saying, you know, you think neurodivergence looks like this, but actually it looks like all of us. You can't make perceptions about it, but what you can do is start to remove some of the barriers that exist, and that understanding as well that a lot of people won't know that they're neurodivergent. They still won't have that understanding that is why sometimes they find things difficult. And it's for me, had I have known when I was younger that I was neurodivergent, that I was autistic, it would have made life so much easier. Some of those things where I thought, oh, why can't I do that? Why is that difficult? That wouldn't have happened. And I think, you know, we owe it to people to have that kind of understanding. And it starts with, there's no stereotypes about being neurodivergent. We are all happy that neurodivergence exists. We're a long way off that yet, though. So, right. I'm conscious of time. It's been brilliant to get all your thoughts there. Amazing to understand where you're all at, and the things that you're doing sound brilliant already. So some of the impetus for change you've touched on there. Starting with what I've got second here. So the expertise, knowledge and skills of neurodivergent people are absolutely crucial and central to resilient, sustainable organisations. We think differently. We think in whole new and different ways that might not have been considered before. We approach things differently. That organisations we're needed as audiences, we're needed within collections or within provision, and we're needed within the workforce. It's absolutely essential. So even on kind of like a business model, it's massively important to organisations that neurodivergent people are understood and placed centrally. But there's a legal need to do it as well. The Equality Act 2010 is really clear about disability and the need to support disabled people. Now, it doesn't at this moment in time specifically talk about neurodivergence, but given the fact that a lot of neurodivergent people do identify as disabled, there's that legal need to deliver the Equality Act. And I think cultural institutions are still not quite aware that it isn't a nice thing to do. It isn't necessarily just an ethical thing to do. It's a legal thing and legal requirement to deliver an equitable experience for neurodivergent people. So you've all touched on this, nothing about us without us. And we would say that the central part to anything to do with neurodivergent people is to ensure that they're right at the centre of what you do. Meaningful consultation. Now, consultation might not necessarily be the way that you consult with other audiences. So as I mentioned, I was situationally non-speaking as a child and a young person. If you'd have put me in a room and asked me for my comments, you wouldn't have got them. But if you'd have asked me in a different way about something that I was interested in, you would have got them. But understanding that and knowing that you're maybe going to have to communicate in different ways. The internet's an amazing thing. And we were talking about TikTok in the break as well. There's lots of autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, other neurodivergent people out there talking about their experiences, talking about what it's like to be a neurodivergent person. And there's organisations like Helen's who actively are working with neurodivergent people who you can consult with, you can talk with, or find that experience. The one thing that we also are really quite passionate about is that the museum sector, and I think the cultural sector as a whole, has tended to see consultation and some of the work that it does with neurodivergent people as a good thing to do. And so they've done it almost as using neurodivergent people as consultants, but without paying. So we're very keen on trying to ensure that if you're working with neurodivergent people and the work that you're doing with them isn't just consultation, it isn't just kind of understanding need, but you would, if this was any other community or any other person you were working with, you'd pay that person. That's exactly what the approach should be when you're working with neurodivergent people. Then we would always say these other things: don't assume and don't stereotype. All the things that you know about what neurodivergent people are like, what they do, what they want, just ignore those for now and go and actually listen to lots of different people and lots of different voices and having different ways of communicating. So lots of neurodivergent people will use assistive technology to communicate. Being able to make that happen and being able to make that work within your organisations is absolutely crucial to make sure that you're getting all of those different voices. So reasonable adjustments. This is something that you're all talking about, but not using the term, but you're all doing it, and doing it quite effectively by the sounds of it in some of the organisations. And the session on Thursday goes into this in more detail. But reasonable adjustments is what is outlined in the Quality Act 2010 as what should be supported to ensure that disabled people can access what you do in an equitable way. They're anticipatory. There's an anticipatory duty. So there's a need to think about in advance what might neurodivergent people need that you can deliver to ensure that they're supported to get that equitable experience. So the things like putting a video on your website, having a room where if there's everything's just overwhelming, a quiet space, someone can go and then come back into the rest of the environment. All the things that you're discussing are reasonable adjustments. They're things that you can be expected to consider somebody might need to then be able to access what you're delivering. There's lots and lots of different reasonable adjustments, and these are some like 3 of the areas where you could consider what might people need. So sensory adjustments, sight, smell, sound. People sometimes forget that smell is so crucial. If an environment is just overwhelmingly, it's too near the canteen, or if it's a really difficult experience for a lot of neurodivergent people to access. So just thinking about sensory needs, what are they, and what kind of adjustments could we put into place that could shift that? Like you were saying, was it you, Helen, that was saying about lifting the light? Just make it lighter, or just making sure that it's much more accessible. Learning adjustments. So things like, if you're giving lots of information, are you giving it all as like a written form, or are you giving it in visual information, chunking information, putting it in different environments, using a reader pen? How might that work so that people who learn differently or need to learn in a different way can access what kind of information you're trying to share? And then anxiety adjustments. How can you make sure that if people are at a heightened level of anxiety, because just coming into a space, we always say this, just always presume that just getting into your space, your organisation, your environment, that's already been incredibly difficult for most neurodivergent people. What adjustments can you put into a place when they're there to make it an okay place to be, so that whatever you're providing is accessible? And then these 2, presume competence. There's an overwhelming perception that exists across a lot of the museum sector. I think the cultural sector, definitely the education sector, is the opposite. Presuming incompetence, so presuming that if somebody doesn't speak, therefore they're not able. And like you said, I've got a doctorate, but at like 10, someone would have asked me questions and they would have presumed that I had no understanding about a situation whatsoever because I couldn't articulate it. That's not okay anymore, because there are other ways that people can show what they know and understand, and just because we can't articulate that doesn't mean we can't do it and we don't understand it. And actually I lost my voice from I had an operation a couple of years ago, and I couldn't speak for about 2 or 3 months. in the role that I do, and I manage another organisation as well. And it was eye-opening again to see the way that people treated me, purely because I couldn't use my voice. I was left out of everything. People didn't even wait for me to write things in the chat. It was just, and we were in the pandemic, so it was in the middle of that, everything was on Zoom. There was just that, this is how society works. You communicate in this way, and if you don't, you're out of the conversation. So just that kind of presuming that people are competent and then making adaptations to ensure that we support that. And then providing those multiple mechanisms for communication and feedback, just the things that we spoke about earlier. So for us, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for equitable cultural institutions. We're not about raising awareness. You know, people know that neurodivergent people exist. They might not know that term, but they know that neurodivergent people exist. It's about acknowledging and appreciating. So the things that you were saying, one of the group was saying about understanding, you know, we need neurodivergent people for various different reasons, because of the skills that they have, because of the way they work, because of the understanding they have, because of their part of our business model, all of those different things, acknowledging and appreciating it. That's what needs to be happening, not just understanding that neurodivergent people exist. Then meaningful consultation and engagement. And then we talk about the 3 levels of engagement. So provision, the stuff we're doing that goes out that people can access, the things that we deliver. The representation, where are neurodivergent people in the things that we do? Where are they in museum displays? Where are they in the plays that we deliver? Where are we seeing neurodivergent people? And are we ensuring that when we represent them, we aren't stereotyping? And then the workforce, because if neurodivergent people aren't within our workforce, it's very difficult for us to make sure that provision and representation is accurate. So after that, any more questions? Is there anything in the chat? I'm just going to have a look. So, oh, brilliant. Right. Yes, we'll definitely send the slides out. Somebody asked a question about that. Oh, yeah, the parents' experience. So, I mean, that perception, particularly as children get older, of other people's perceptions about, oh, well, that child's being naughty or that child's doing this, and not understanding that we all don't work in the same way. And it is going to take a long time. We're not anywhere near having a situation where people go, do you know what, actually, it's okay. You know, it's not up to me to judge somebody else. We're a long way from that. Yeah, exactly. Lots of different ways of providing that information. In our house, I will not read written information at all. IKEA, it's useless. I will just put something together. I won't. I just can't make my brain work in that way. My husband's totally the opposite. Has to be written. If it's visual, it just doesn't work. And it's just like anybody. We all access things in different ways, different learning styles, different ways of being able to do it. The more different things you can anticipate and the more different ways you can provide that information in advance, the more people you're going to be able to remove the barriers for, whether they know they're neurodivergent or not. And I think somebody quite early on mentioned that, you know, that kind of ensuring that if you've anticipated and you've put lots of different adjustments in place, then you're going to automatically support lots of people. There might be some specific different individual things that need to happen, and there might be, dependent on which neurodivergent people you're working with, some more bespoke things. But thinking about it in advance, it just will automatically support lots of people. So yes, any other questions? Okay, conscious of time, I'm going to get told off in a minute. So final breakout room. So I'm going to make this just 5 minutes, and it's simply, what else do you need to know in order to provide equity for neurodivergent people? What is still missing in terms of training, knowledge, understanding that you don't have at the moment that you really need support with? So just 5 minutes, it will be the same breakout group. And if the same people are happy to come back, if you're not, don't worry, we won't have lots of time. So yeah, is it okay to go back into breakout rooms, Abby? I think we're all back. So we've got about 2 minutes. So if anyone would like to feedback from the groups about what kind of, yeah, Rachel, go for it.
We said it would be great to have contact details of people or organisations with experience. It would be good to have case studies of examples of good practice, and it would be great to hear from people with lived experiences and in-person case studies.
Brilliant. Yeah, definitely. Some of the things we're working towards getting those, I think they're essential. Thank you. David?
We had a bit of a conversation around the need for understanding that you have to go through a sort of cultural change process in an organisation, and to be patient as that kind of works its way through. There'll be some challenges, but the more that the more open the subject is, the more rewards they get, that makes it more open, it changes, develops their experience. So to be prepared for a kind of long-term cultural change.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's not going to be a quick change. And some people will be more reticent to shift than others. One more, Rachel.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about kind of training, but for kind of all staff, and that importance of kind of front of house. A lot of the times when we're training and thinking about things, it's kind of our learning and engagement teams, but often the people the public will meet will be that front of house staff, and how that can be really challenging when they're casual, but how important that is that they're on the same page as everyone else, and kind of as helpful and inclusive as we're wanting them to be.
Oh, totally. Yeah, because that's right. That's the first port of call, isn't it? For most of us, the front of house staff are so crucial. Thank you. I will drop my email address and our Twitter handle in the chat. If you need to get in touch or you want to ask any of the questions, feel free to drop a line through. And a thank you to all of you so much for your participation today. This is Obi, who is our assistance dog, and is a reasonable adjustment. So there are lots of different things that people will use as reasonable adjustments. And I guess it's just like you're saying, David, that cultural organisational shift to get everybody working on the same kind of page and thinking about neurodivergent people in a different way. That's the starting point. Thank you so much, everyone.